chapter 25 is our last chapter, and it is on international law. And it's probably, I would say, the most hardest one. I mean, at least I feel it is. There's a ton of different terminology, and it's almost one of those chapters that you might just have to do some flashcards and kind of memorize some of this, some of these terms. But basically, it comes from international customs, which again are just generally accepted practices over time, treaties and international agreements that have been written up, and then international organizations that govern some of this international law and trade. So then when we get into some of the different terminologies, a comity is when one nation defers the laws to another country as long as those laws are consistent. So again, when we talk about some of these things, think we're dealing with businesses that are doing business in other countries. So say Coca-Cola or Pepsi, where they're worldwide, they're in all different countries, and maybe they have distributing plants or sales offices or things like that. So they're going to defer to the laws of that other country, assuming they're fairly consistent. So maybe if they're doing business in Germany or England, they would do that type of situation. An act of the state doctrine is when it's saying that one country may not examine the public acts of another foreign government. So we cannot put those other countries on trial and and have a court of law examine those public acts. I mean, we as media and whatnot can talk about them, but we can't legally judge them through this act of state doctrine. Sovereign immunity it gives foreign nations immunity from any legal action in the United States, again, court systems. So when we talk about these different things, know that it means in our courts. Because I feel like we do a lot of this stuff, but media can do what it wants and report on what it wants. But we're saying you can't take some of these things and take them back into our courts of law. So how companies do business internationally it's exporting and importing. So ideally, we're the past at least decade, maybe 20 years, we've been trying to level that out so that we are doing more exporting than we are importing. Because for a period of time, those imports were a lot higher than what was being exported, which isn't good for our economy. So if it's an export, it means the U.S. company is selling to a foreign purchaser, not the other way around, that we're not buying foreign goods, but we are selling to those foreign companies. So like I said, there can be distributorships where, like say with Pepsi, we could have distributors of Pepsi products and Coke products in all different countries, where then they are bottling and sending off the product and selling it to their local communities. And I don't know how, I'm not real familiar on our car, but the same thing could be like with our car manufacturers. If we are able to sell Ford or Dodge or Chrysler or any of those things up in Canada or Mexico or wherever we have those agreements, those could be distributorships as well. We do have that national initiative. Like I said, we're trying to increase the amount that we export over the next 3 to 5 years. That's a big push for our economy. Our larger companies do manufacture abroad. That's what sometimes, gets at least our U.S. local communities upset when we hear like if the Hoover Company closes down and then all of a sudden they're using Mexican facilities to manufacture the product. So how there could be two different ways that they could do it. They could license it, where the foreign producer has the right to make and sell the U.S. products. So they can make them over there, with the trademarks and the brands and all that stuff, and go ahead and sell them. That's a way to do it. Or they could just buy subsidiaries. So the U.S. parent company is going to purchase a foreign company, and they have to at least own 50% of them in order to consolidate and have them be considered a subsidiary that they can kind of control. And many times in our countries that are more communist in nature, that's the only way that a US company can get in, is if they do a subsidiary where they own 50% and then the local government or the local corporations own the other 50%. So we're not able to completely take it over, but we can get in there, and at least get our products out into those markets. There's investment protections against property that is located in other countries. So an expropriation is when the property is seized with compensation. A confiscation is when the property is seized without compensation. So again, that would be property located on foreign soil. Can it be seized or taken over from us? So exports. So back to the exports or imports. So Congress cannot tax exports, but they can set quotas. And I don't know, I feel like that might have been overturned recently. I'm not 100% sure about that statement that they cannot tax it. But they can set quotas. So what that would say is only so much product can either come into our market or so much product can go out of our market. And if it's an export control, like say it's farm products or things that we need, or steel. There was a time that we needed steel, but China was buying so much of our steel. So we could control that to say we need to protect our interests first. So only a certain amount can be exported, and we can set those quotas. Um, and maybe they can't tax them. I'm not 100% sure. It says they can't, but I thought that might have been overturned recently. Imports, though, those we can tax, so we can set limits to say, hey, you can't. Foreign companies can't flood our markets with products that then all of a sudden, think of your basic economics. If our market gets flooded with product, the price is going to go down because there's going to be a large quantity and a lower demand. It's going to push product prices down, and then that can hurt our local producers. So we can set quotas to say, no, you can't flood our markets like that, and we can put taxes on those imports. So those are called tariffs, and that will make those products a little bit more expensive, because obviously normally the tariffs are going to be paid by us as consumers. I mean, ultimately, the price that we pay will include those. There can be political things where we say, hey, we're not going to take any if we're at war or at a hostile agreement with other countries, we're not going to allow them to sell product in our country. And again, like I said, we're going to not allow them to dump their product. There's different contract clauses in these commercial contracts. So it'll set forth which is our language that's going to dictate it. So is it, is it in English, our U.S. language, or is it going to be in their language, whatever country we're dealing with? A choice of law. So would it be U.S. courts that dictate the contract, or whatever the local courts would be? And then the force majeure clause states that acts of God will release the party from any liabilities. So those are things that are out of our control. It'll also discuss the payment methods again. So while we settle the bills in U.S. dollars or in other currencies, and we see what if you kind of pay attention to what happens in these foreign exchange markets, the U.S. dollar changes in how much it can be converted into like a euro or a yen. And as the US dollar loses buying power, that impacts our US companies negatively to some extent. Depends on the circumstances, but it'll take more US dollars to buy another product if the US dollar is deflating. So it maybe does make a difference on what type of currency you use to settle your transaction. Banks have a service that allows, so say you're a U.S. company and you want to have a supplier from another country. And they're thinking, well, they don't know you. So, I mean, do they want to extend credit to a company that's halfway around the world and that they don't know? The banks can kind of bridge that gap by offering a letter of credit. So they'll say, okay, my bank will agree that those funds are available. Maybe they even hold them in escrow so that then they pay them out as soon as the goods are released and received, and then if you're halfway around the world, there's a timing in the shipping. So maybe that factors into it as well. But then the banks kind of can be that that bridge between those two companies providing that letter of credit. There's antitrust laws, which promote free competition, even across our global economy. There's international torts, where businesses cannot, they cannot do any human right violations or whatever, especially U.S. companies. I mean, U.S. companies are held to the same standards that we have here in the United States. So they cannot be, violating child labor laws or, taking advantage of local workforce and not having safe work environments and those kind of things. There's also anti-discrimination laws, so that again, they must abide by those same rules that we talked about back in chapter 18. So they can't discriminate based on race, color, religion, age, disability, gender, all of those things. So again, it says unless that violates the law of the local community, assuming that it's not a very backward society, we would probably just be going with our U.S. laws. Okay, so that is international law.